The city of Chicago was always alive with energy. Tall buildings touched the clouds, streets buzzed with traffic, and people rushed through their daily routines. Amid the busy rhythm of the city, there were places that slowed down time: hospitals, where people fought for life, where families cried and prayed, and where small acts of kindness carried deep meaning. In one of those hospitals, a young nurse named Emily worked tirelessly, giving her days and nights to her patients. Emily had chosen nursing because she wanted to make a difference. She was not the kind of person who dreamed of fame or wealth. Her greatest joy came from helping people heal, even if she could not always cure their pain. Her co-workers admired her dedication, and patients trusted her because she always treated them with gentleness and respect. She had a warm smile that reassured the frightened and a patient ear that listened to those who had no one else to talk to. It was on a cold November morning when she first met Mr. Thompson. He was an elderly man, thin and frail, with silver hair and tired eyes. The doctors knew his time was short, but he faced his illness with quiet dignity. Unlike some patients who complained or resisted treatment, Mr. Thompson rarely asked for anything. He greeted the staff politely and spent most of his time looking out the window of his room, as though searching for something beyond the skyline. Emily was assigned to care for him that week. From the beginning, she noticed something different about him. There was a heaviness in his gaze, a kind of unspoken sorrow that lingered behind his calm expression. Whenever she checked his vitals or brought him medication, he would smile faintly and thank her, but his eyes always seemed distant. One afternoon, while adjusting his blanket, Emily asked softly, "Mr. Thompson, is there anything I can do to make you more comfortable?" He turned his head slowly toward her, his lips curling into a gentle smile. "You've already done more than you know, Nurse Emily. But there is one last thing that has been on my heart." Her curiosity sparked, but she did not press him. She knew patients often needed time to open up. Instead, she sat by his bedside for a moment, letting silence fill the room. The steady hum of machines and the faint chatter of nurses in the hallway faded into the background. Finally, Mr. Thompson sighed and spoke again. "I have a wish," he said quietly, his voice almost trembling. "A wish I have carried with me for many years. And now, as my days grow fewer, it feels heavier than ever. I want someone I can trust to help me fulfill it." Emily leaned forward, her heart tightening. She had heard many patients express final wishes before. Some wanted to see family one last time, some wanted to taste their favorite food, and some simply wanted to hear a song that reminded them of their youth. But the way Mr. Thompson said it made her believe his request would be different. "You can trust me," she said gently. "If it's something I can do, I'll help you." Mr. Thompson closed his eyes for a moment, as though gathering strength. Then he whispered, "I will tell you soon. But you must promise me something. Promise me that you won't give up halfway. This wish is not for me alone. It may change more lives than you imagine." Emily's mind filled with questions, but she kept her calm. "I promise," she replied. From that moment, something shifted between them. Their conversations grew longer, not about sickness or medicine but about life itself. Mr. Thompson spoke of his childhood, of growing up in a small Midwestern town, of summers spent fishing by the river and winters huddled by the fireplace with his family. He told her stories about his younger years, when he worked in a factory and dreamed of traveling the world but never got the chance. One story in particular caught Emily's attention. He spoke about a woman he had once loved deeply, many decades ago. His eyes softened as he described her laughter, her kindness, and the way she made even ordinary days feel magical. Emily could sense the emotions still alive in his voice, even after so many years. Yet he never mentioned why they had parted, nor what had become of her. Late one evening, after most of the ward had quieted, Emily returned to check on him. He was awake, staring at the ceiling. When she asked if he was in pain, he shook his head slowly. "No pain tonight," he said softly. Just memories. And the weight of something unfinished. Emily sat down beside him, sensing he was ready to reveal what had been pressing on his heart. He turned his head toward her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. My last wish, he began, is not about comfort or medicine. It is about closure. For years, I have kept something hidden, something I never had the courage to face. And now, I want you to be the one to bring it into the light. Emily's pulse quickened. She could feel the importance of his words. Whatever he was about to reveal was no ordinary request. Tell me, she urged gently. I will do everything I can. Mr. Thompson's lips trembled as he tried to form the words, but instead he fell silent, shaking his head slightly. Tomorrow, he whispered. I will tell you tomorrow. Tonight, let me rest. You'll need all your strength when you hear it. Emily nodded, respecting his decision, though her heart burned with anticipation. She tucked him in and dimmed the lights, whispering a soft good night. As she walked out of the room, she glanced back one more time. He was still awake, staring out the window at the city lights, as though searching for answers in the stars. That night, Emily lay awake in her small apartment, replaying his words again and again. She wondered what secret he carried, what kind of wish could be so powerful that it haunted him at the end of his life. The city outside her window roared with its usual sounds: sirens, car horns, the distant hum of trains, but inside her heart, there was only silence and the echo of his voice. The following morning, Emily arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. She couldn't shake her restlessness. As she walked through the quiet corridors, she reminded herself that she had promised him her trust. Whatever his request would be, she was ready to face it. But deep inside, she could not help feeling that his wish would not only change his final days, it might also change her own life forever. And so, the stage was set. Emily, a nurse driven by compassion, and Mr. Thompson, a man carrying a hidden truth, were now bound together by a promise. Neither of them knew just how far that promise would reach, or how shocking the discovery ahead would be. But one thing was certain: the journey had begun. The following day, Emily entered the hospital with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. Her heart beat a little faster than usual as she walked through the bright hallways. Nurses rushed past her, doctors spoke in hushed tones, and families gathered in corners of the ward. Yet, among all the busyness, Emily's thoughts remained fixed on one person: Mr. Thompson. She had promised him her trust, and today she felt he might finally share the secret that weighed on him. When she stepped into his room, she found him sitting slightly upright, gazing out the window. The weak morning light touched his pale face, highlighting the lines of a life filled with both joy and sorrow. He turned when he sensed her presence, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. You came early, he whispered. I couldn't stay away, Emily replied softly, placing his breakfast tray beside him. I kept thinking about what you told me. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Emily could hear the steady beep of the monitor and the distant clatter of hospital carts. Finally, Mr. Thompson took a slow breath and nodded. It's time, he said. I can't keep it hidden any longer. I want to tell you everything. Emily pulled a chair close to his bed and sat down, her eyes filled with quiet encouragement. She didn't rush him. She let him find his words. Mr. Thompson's voice trembled as he began. Many years ago, when I was a young man, I fell in love. Her name was Margaret. She was kind, graceful, and had a way of lighting up every room she walked into. We planned a future together, but life has its own ways. Circumstances separated us, and I never told her how deeply I loved her. I wrote a letter once, poured everything into it, but I never sent it. That letter still exists, and it is my last wish that it reaches her. Emily listened intently, her heart tightening with emotion. She could feel the weight of his regret in every word. He wasn't simply asking her to deliver a piece of paper. He was asking her to carry his heart across time, to deliver a message that had waited decades for its moment. "Where is the letter now?" she asked gently. "In my house," he answered. "It's in a wooden chest in the attic. The key is hidden in the desk drawer of my study. Everything is as I left it years ago. I was too much of a coward to send it, and now, with little time left, it is the only unfinished part of my life." Emily reached out and held his hand, surprised at how cold it felt. "I will find it," she said with quiet determination. "And I will deliver it for you." For the first time in days, Mr. Thompson's eyes filled with relief. A single tear slipped down his cheek as he whispered, "Thank you, Emily. You don't know how much this means to me." That evening, after her shift ended, Emily followed the address he had given her. The taxi ride through Chicago felt different this time. The busy streets, glowing shop lights, and chatter of pedestrians all blurred together in her mind. She wasn't simply traveling across the city, she felt as if she was stepping into another man's memories. When the cab stopped in front of a small brick house, Emily's breath caught. It stood quietly on a narrow street, its paint faded, its porch worn by years of weather. Yet, there was a dignity about it, as though the house had patiently guarded secrets for decades. She stepped out, her shoes crunching on the gravel. The air carried the scent of fallen leaves and damp wood. Using the spare key Mr. Thompson had entrusted to her, she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The moment she entered, she was struck by the stillness. The house smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Dust floated in the golden light streaming through the curtains. It felt like time had stopped. Emily walked slowly through the rooms. Each one told a silent story. A framed photograph of a young couple sat on a shelf, their smiles frozen in black and white. A clock ticked faintly in the living room, its pendulum swinging lazily. Books lined the shelves, their spines faded but still proud. She felt like she was intruding on someone's private world, yet at the same time, she felt honored to be there. She reached the study and found the desk exactly where Mr. Thompson had said it would be. The wood was dark and smooth, worn from years of use. She opened the drawer carefully, her fingers brushing against old pens, scraps of paper, and finally a small brass key wrapped in a piece of cloth. She held it in her palm, staring at it as if it were a treasure. With the key in hand, Emily climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. The wooden steps creaked under her weight, and the air grew cooler. She pushed open the attic door, and the scent of dust filled her nose. Boxes and trunks were stacked neatly, their surfaces covered with a thin layer of time. In the far corner, she spotted a wooden chest, small but elegant, its surface carved with intricate patterns. Kneeling before it, she inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. Slowly, she lifted the lid. Inside were bundles of old photographs, yellowed letters, and keepsakes carefully preserved. Her fingers trembled as she sifted through them until she found a single envelope, its paper faded with age but still intact. On the front was the name Margaret, written in delicate handwriting. Emily stared at it for a long moment, her breath caught in her chest. This was the letter that had remained silent for so many years, holding words that had never been spoken. She could feel the weight of it in her hands, not just the paper, but the emotions pressed into every line of ink. As she stood there in the dim attic, surrounded by forgotten memories, she thought about the journey of that letter. How many times had Mr. Thompson looked at it, wanting to send it but never finding the courage? How many nights had he lain awake, wishing he had done things differently? Carefully, Emily slipped the letter into her bag and closed the chest. She locked it again, leaving everything else undisturbed. As she walked back down the stairs, the house seemed to sigh softly, as if grateful that its secret was finally being set free. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Emily stood on the porch, clutching her bag tightly. The cool evening breeze brushed against her face. She felt a mixture of emotions: curiosity, responsibility, and even fear. Who was Margaret? Was she still alive? What would happen when she finally read this letter? On the ride back to her apartment, Emily kept glancing at the bag where the letter rested. She didn't dare open it, though her heart longed to know its contents. She respected Mr. Thompson's trust, and she knew that some secrets were not hers to read. Yet her imagination ran wild. Was it a confession of love? An apology? A promise never fulfilled? When she finally arrived home, she placed the bag carefully on her kitchen table. She sat there in silence, staring at it under the warm glow of the lamp. The city outside her window roared with its usual sounds, but Emily's thoughts were far away. She realized that this task was more than just delivering a letter. It was about connecting the past to the present, about giving a man peace and perhaps giving a woman an unexpected gift from long ago. She had no idea how Margaret would react or what the letter might stir in her heart, but she knew one thing for certain: this journey was going to change everything. And so, as the night deepened, Emily closed her eyes with the letter safe in her possession. She didn't know yet that the story she had stepped into would not only fulfill Mr. Thompson's last wish but would also lead her to a discovery that would shock her in ways she had never imagined. The next morning, Emily woke up earlier than usual. The bag with the old letter sat on her kitchen table, as though it were silently watching her. All through the night, she had turned in bed, unable to stop thinking about what the envelope contained. She resisted the temptation to open it, reminding herself that it wasn't her secret to read. She had promised Mr. Thompson she would honor his trust, and that promise meant everything to her. When she arrived at the hospital, she walked straight to his room. He was awake, though his face looked weaker than the day before. His breathing was slower, and his hands trembled slightly as he tried to adjust his blanket. Emily hurried to his side, gently helping him. "You went," he whispered with effort, his eyes shining with expectation. "Yes," Emily said softly. "I went to your house. I found the letter." His lips parted in relief, and for a moment, he closed his eyes as though a heavy burden had lifted from his chest. "You don't know," he whispered, "how much peace that gives me already. I never thought anyone would ever find it." Emily smiled gently. "It's safe now. I'll make sure it reaches her." For a moment, he simply stared at her with gratitude so deep it brought tears to her eyes. Then, after a pause, he asked, "Do you want to know who Margaret is?" Emily nodded slowly. She had been curious ever since she first heard the name. "She was my greatest love," he began, his voice fragile but filled with emotion. "We met when we were both young, in our 20s. She worked at a small bookstore near the factory where I had my job. Every evening, I'd pass by the store just to catch a glimpse of her smile. It took me months to finally gather the courage to speak to her. When I did, it felt like the world opened up. We spent hours walking along the lake, sharing dreams and laughing about silly things. I wanted to marry her, but life had other plans. Her family moved away, and I was too poor, too uncertain to follow her. I told myself I would wait, but time slipped by." His voice grew heavier, his eyes clouded with sadness. "Years later, I wrote that letter, hoping one day I'd find her. But I never sent it. Fear held me back. Fear that she had moved on. Fear that my words would arrive too late. And so, it stayed in that chest all these years." Emily's chest tightened as she listened. She thought about how many people carried silent regrets through their lives. "Do you know where she is now?" she asked carefully. "I heard once that she stayed in Illinois," he said slowly, "but I lost all contact. I don't know if she is still alive." Emily felt the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her. Finding Margaret would not be easy. Decades had passed, and time had a way of scattering people across the world. But she looked at Mr. Thompson's frail form and knew she couldn't let him down. "I'll try to find her," Emily promised. No matter how long it takes. His lips curled into a faint smile. You have a brave heart, Emily. You remind me of her, in some ways. The rest of her shift passed quickly, though her thoughts were constantly on the letter. That evening, instead of going straight home, she stopped by the library. She used the public computer and began searching. She typed Margaret, Illinois into the search bar, but dozens of results appeared: articles, records, and directories. It was overwhelming. She didn't even know Margaret's last name. She sat back in her chair, rubbing her temples. Where do I even start? She whispered to herself. Over the next few days, Emily devoted every spare moment to the search. She asked Mr. Thompson gently if he could recall any more details. Sometimes his memory failed him, but other times, fragments surfaced. He remembered the name of the bookstore, Whitman's Books, and the small town where it once stood. Emily wrote everything down, determined to follow every lead. One evening, she called the local historical society of that town. An elderly volunteer answered, and after Emily explained what she was looking for, the woman grew quiet. Whitman's Books, the volunteer repeated. Yes, I remember. It closed many years ago. But I do recall a young woman named Margaret who worked there. Let me check the old town records. Emily's heart raced as she waited. A few minutes later, the woman returned. There was a Margaret Whitman, likely the owner's daughter. She married someone in the early 70s, but I'll have to dig deeper to know more. Please, Emily said eagerly. It's very important. That night, Emily returned to the hospital with a spark of hope. She sat by Mr. Thompson's bed and told him what she had learned. His tired eyes lit up for the first time in days. Margaret Whitman, he whispered. Yes, that was her. I remember now. He closed his eyes, and a faint smile appeared on his lips, as though just hearing her name again gave him strength. Emily knew she had taken the first step, but there was still a long journey ahead. Days turned into weeks as she pieced together bits of information: marriage records, addresses, and even old newspaper clippings. Each clue drew her closer, but also made her wonder, what if Margaret no longer wanted to remember? What if this letter opened wounds better left untouched? One night, Emily sat in her apartment with the letter in front of her. She had resisted opening it for so long, but her curiosity gnawed at her. She wanted to know what it contained, not for herself, but to understand the depth of what she was delivering. She reached for it, her fingers trembling, but then she stopped. She couldn't betray Mr. Thompson's trust. Whatever those words were, they belonged only to Margaret. Instead, she folded her hands and whispered to herself, I'll do this the right way. His words must remain pure. The next day, Emily received a call from the Historical Society. The woman she had spoken with had found an old address connected to Margaret Whitman's family. Emily wrote it down carefully, her heart thudding in her chest. She returned to the hospital to share the news with Mr. Thompson. His face, though pale, glowed with gratitude. You've given me something I thought I'd never have again, hope, he said weakly. Emily sat by his bed, holding his hand firmly. We're getting closer. I promise I'll find her. That night, as she walked out of the hospital, she gazed at the city skyline. The lights sparkled like stars, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the path ahead was clearer. Yet deep inside, she also knew the journey was far from over. Delivering that letter would not just fulfill a man's last wish, it would uncover truths hidden for decades. And Emily, without realizing it, was about to step into a story that would forever change her own life. The days that followed carried a quiet urgency for Emily. Each time she entered Mr. Thompson's hospital room, she could see that his strength was fading. His voice grew softer, his movements slower, and yet his eyes shone brighter whenever she mentioned the progress she had made. Emily knew time was slipping away, but she was determined to complete what she had started. One evening, Emily sat at her small kitchen table with a pile of notes spread out before her. Old addresses, phone numbers, and fragments of information filled her notebook. She had already discovered that Margaret Whitman had married decades ago, but her husband's surname was harder to track. She scrolled through pages of public records on her laptop, frustration building. So many names, so many possibilities. She sighed, rubbing her tired eyes, but then a small detail caught her attention: a newspaper clipping from the late 70s mentioning a Margaret Whitman Dawson at a local charity event in a suburb just outside Chicago. Her heart raced. Could this be the same woman? The article mentioned that Margaret had organized a fundraiser for children in need, describing her as warm, dedicated, and loved by the community. Emily whispered to herself, "That has to be her." The next day, after her hospital shift, Emily traveled to the suburb listed in the article. The train ride felt long, her thoughts circling endlessly. What would she say if she found Margaret? Would Margaret even want to hear about a letter written so long ago? She imagined every possible reaction: shock, joy, anger, or even sorrow. When she arrived, the town felt smaller and quieter than the city she knew. The streets were lined with old oak trees, and children played in front yards. Emily walked to the address she had copied down. It was a modest but beautiful house, painted a soft shade of blue, with flower pots arranged neatly on the porch. She stood there for a moment, gathering her courage. Before she could knock, the door opened, and an elderly woman stepped outside. Her hair was silver, tied back neatly, and her face bore gentle lines that spoke of years of living. Emily's breath caught. Something in the woman's eyes reminded her of the way Mr. Thompson had described Margaret: kind, graceful, unforgettable. "Can I help you?" the woman asked politely. Emily hesitated, clutching the bag where the letter rested. "Are you Margaret Whitman?" she asked carefully. The woman tilted her head, a faint smile touching her lips. "I used to be. My name now is Margaret Dawson. But yes, Whitman was my family name. May I ask who you are?" Emily's voice trembled slightly as she introduced herself. "My name is Emily. I'm a nurse from Chicago. I've been taking care of someone very dear to you, Mr. James Thompson." The smile on Margaret's face froze. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked as though the air had been knocked from her lungs. She gripped the porch railing for support. "James," she whispered. "He's alive." Emily nodded. "Yes. He's very ill, but he wanted me to find you. He asked me to deliver something to you." With careful steps, Emily opened her bag and brought out the faded envelope. Margaret's hands shook as she reached for it. She held it delicately, staring at her own name written in handwriting she clearly recognized. Her eyes filled with tears before she had even opened it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Emily stood quietly, giving her the space she needed. Finally, Margaret whispered, I thought he had forgotten me." Her voice broke, and she covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Emily's heart softened. She felt as though she was standing inside a story much larger than herself. "He never forgot you," she said softly. "Not for one day." Margaret closed her eyes, clutching the letter against her chest. Then she looked at Emily with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Would you like to come inside?" Inside the house, the air was warm, filled with the scent of fresh flowers. Margaret led Emily to a small living room where photographs lined the shelves: family portraits, children, and grandchildren. Yet, in the corner of one shelf, Emily noticed a faded photograph of a young man and woman standing together by a lake. Even without asking, she knew who they were. Margaret sat down slowly, her hands still trembling as she opened the envelope. She unfolded the paper inside, and as her eyes scanned the words written decades ago, tears streamed down her cheeks. She pressed the letter to her heart and whispered, "He loved me, he truly loved me." Emily sat across from her, silent but attentive. She didn't want to intrude on the private moment, yet she couldn't help but feel moved by the depth of emotion that filled the room. After several minutes, Margaret looked up. "I don't know how to thank you. This letter, it means more to me than I can explain." Emily smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me. All he wanted was for you to know. That was his last wish." Margaret wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. Is he still in the hospital?" "Yes," Emily said softly. "He's weak, but he's holding on. I think he was waiting for this for you." Margaret placed her hand over her mouth, overwhelmed by emotions. Then she whispered, "I need to see him. Please, can you take me to him?" Emily's heart swelled with hope. She hadn't dared imagine this possibility, but now it was unfolding right before her. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'll arrange it." That night, Emily returned to the hospital with renewed determination. She found Mr. Thompson awake, though his breaths were shallow. When she told him she had found Margaret, his eyes widened, shining with a light she hadn't seen before. "You found her," he whispered, almost in disbelief. "Yes," Emily said, her own voice trembling with emotion. "She read your letter. And she wants to see you." Tears slid down his cheeks as he whispered her name, Margaret. His frail hands gripped Emily's, and for the first time in many days, he smiled with pure joy. Emily leaned closer. "Hold on, Mr. Thompson. She's coming. Very soon, she'll be here." That night, Emily barely slept. She couldn't stop thinking about the reunion that was about to happen. She imagined the moment when two souls, separated for decades, would finally see each other again. She prayed silently that Mr. Thompson would have enough strength to experience it. The following morning, Margaret arrived at the hospital. She walked slowly but with determination, clutching the letter close to her chest. Emily guided her through the hallways, her own heart pounding with anticipation. When they reached the room, Emily paused at the door. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Margaret nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. Emily opened the door gently, and Margaret stepped inside. Mr. Thompson turned his head, his weak eyes widening as they fell upon the woman standing before him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The room was filled with silence, broken only by the steady rhythm of the monitor. Finally, Mr. Thompson whispered, his voice shaking, "Margaret." Her lips trembled as she stepped closer. "James." Emily stood quietly in the corner, her eyes misty. She knew this was their moment. The wish that had carried so much weight was finally being fulfilled. When Margaret entered the hospital room, time seemed to stop. The years that had stretched endlessly between them vanished in an instant. For a moment, they were not two elderly souls burdened by age and illness, but two young hearts reunited after a long separation. Mr. Thompson's tired eyes glowed with life, and Margaret's trembling lips curved into a smile mixed with joy and sorrow. "James," she whispered again, her voice breaking as she reached for his hand. His frail fingers closed around hers with surprising strength. "Margaret, you came," he said weakly, his voice filled with disbelief and gratitude. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes as she leaned closer to him. "I never stopped thinking of you," she confessed softly. "All these years, I wondered what became of you. And now after so long we're here again." Emily stood near the door, her heart heavy with emotion. She had witnessed countless scenes in the hospital, moments of grief, of hope, of final goodbyes, but never something as powerful as this. It was as though she was watching love itself take form, transcending time and distance. She stayed quiet, giving them the privacy they deserved, yet every word touched her deeply. Mr. Thompson's breathing was shallow, but his spirit seemed renewed by her presence. "I wanted to tell you, all those years ago," he whispered, his hand trembling as he held hers, "but I was afraid. Afraid you had moved on, afraid my words would come too late. That letter, it held everything I never said. Margaret's tears fell freely as she nodded. I read it, James. Every word. And it meant the world to me. I wish I had known then. My life took a different path, but in my heart, you always had a place. For a long while, the two of them simply held each other's gaze, speaking not with words but with silence filled with meaning. Emily watched as the years of regret melted away, replaced by peace and tenderness. The doctors had warned Emily that Mr. Thompson didn't have much time left, and she could see it now. His breaths grew weaker, but his face was serene, as though the burden he had carried for decades had finally been lifted. Margaret stayed by his side, whispering softly, recounting old memories, reminding him of the days by the lake, of the laughter they had once shared. At one point, he closed his eyes, and Emily feared he might slip away. But then he spoke again, his voice fragile yet steady. Margaret, thank you, for coming. I can leave this world knowing you knew my heart. She kissed his forehead gently, tears streaming down her cheeks. And I can live the rest of my days knowing that your love never faded. Emily turned her face away for a moment, brushing away her own tears. She had never believed so strongly in the power of love until now. It amazed her how a single letter, hidden away for decades, had brought two lives back together at the very end. As the hours passed, Margaret never left his side. She held his hand, speaking softly, while Emily checked on him quietly. The room, though filled with machines, felt more like a sacred space where something greater than life or death was happening. It was a reunion that had been written in the stars, waiting for its moment. Late into the night, Mr. Thompson's breathing grew faint. Emily knew the time was near. She stood beside Margaret, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Together, they watched as his chest rose and fell more slowly with each breath. James, Margaret whispered, her voice breaking, I'm here. I'm with you. With his last strength, he smiled faintly. I'm not afraid anymore, he whispered. His eyes lingered on Margaret's face one last time, filled with peace, before slowly closing. The monitor beeped softly, then fell into silence. Margaret buried her face in his chest, her shoulders shaking with grief, but there was no despair in her cry. Instead, there was a bittersweet peace. She had been given the chance to say goodbye, and he had been given the chance to leave this world with the woman he loved beside him. Emily stayed with her, tears rolling down her cheeks. She had seen many patients take their last breath, but this moment felt different. It wasn't just the end of a life, it was the fulfillment of a wish, the closing of a circle left open for decades. Later that night, when the hospital staff had completed their duties, Margaret sat with Emily in the quiet waiting room. Her eyes were red from crying, but her face carried a calmness. She held the letter tightly in her hands. Emily, she said softly, I don't know how to thank you. You gave James peace, and you gave me a gift I never thought I would have again. Without you, this reunion would never have happened. Emily shook her head gently. It was his wish, Margaret. I only carried it. It was his love that kept it alive all these years. Margaret smiled faintly. But you were the bridge. You had the kindness and courage to step into his life and make this possible. You've reminded me that there are still people in this world who carry selfless hearts. Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had chosen nursing because she wanted to help people, but in this moment, she realized it wasn't just about healing bodies. It was about healing hearts, about giving people dignity and peace, even at the end. In the days that followed, Margaret attended Mr. Thompson's funeral. It was a small, simple service, attended by a few relatives and friends. Emily stood quietly in the back, her eyes misty as she listened to the words spoken in his memory. Margaret read a part of his letter during the service, her voice trembling but strong. Everyone who heard it was moved deeply. After the service, Margaret approached Emily and hugged her tightly. "You will always be part of this story," she said softly. "I will never forget what you've done." Emily returned to her work at the hospital, but she carried the memory of Mr. Thompson and Margaret with her. Their story reminded her of the importance of listening, of being present, and of honoring the wishes of those nearing the end. Every time she walked into a patient's room after that, she did so with even more compassion, remembering how much even the smallest act of kindness could mean. Sometimes, late at night, Emily would look out at the city lights and think of Mr. Thompson. She would imagine him smiling, free of regret, reunited with peace. And she would remember Margaret's trembling hands clutching that letter, her tears falling as she read words written decades ago. The experience changed Emily in ways she couldn't explain. It reminded her that love is timeless, that even after years of silence, it can speak again. It reminded her that fulfilling a simple wish could alter the course of lives. And it reminded her that in her work, she was not just a nurse, she was a witness to the deepest parts of the human heart. For Margaret, life went on, but with a renewed sense of gratitude. She visited Emily sometimes at the hospital, bringing flowers or baked goods, always reminding her of the bond they now shared. And every time she came, she carried the letter close, a symbol of love that had survived the silence of decades. As for Emily, she would often tell her fellow nurses about the importance of promises, though she never shared the full details. It was a story she kept close to her heart, a reminder that behind every patient's eyes was a life filled with stories, regrets, and dreams. And so, the journey came full circle. A letter hidden for years had found its way into the right hands. A man left this world with peace. A woman received the truth she had longed for. And a young nurse discovered that sometimes, the simplest acts of kindness could create the most profound impact.